Hi everyone, I am Kim Raath. I am the founder and CEO of Topl. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know we have a few of the Topl community members who are listening in, and I want to thank you for your support and for this growing community. At the same time, please feel free to drop any comments in the comment box and let me know when and where you were listening from and who you work for, because we have people around the world that know about Topl. Please also drop any questions if you'd like for us to answer it throughout this talk today into that comment box. For audience members that actually do not know Topl yet, Topl is actually building an impact monetization engine that enables various different businesses and corporations to unlock the value of their positive impact. Now, what is our secret sauce and how do we help companies do this? The Topl blockchain is our secret sauce. It's actually the world's first blockchain built for tracking, tokenizing, and transacting positive impact through truly monetizing your impact. We use the Topl blockchain, and the Topl blockchain is, as a lot of people ask me, we actually do consume 10 million times less energy than earlier blockchains. And we also have some same security guarantees than earlier proof of work blockchains. So we have a lot of partners that are already changing the world, and you'll meet one of them today. The Topl blockchain tracks everything from cocoa all the way from to chocolate bar. We have different companies tracking coffee from bean to brew. We have diamonds tracked from mine to marriage. It can also ensure, and this is a conversation we'll have today with one of our partners, that COVID-19 test kits remain cold and fully effective throughout their whole value chain. The Topl blockchain is truly revolutionizing various different industries, not just supply chains and the few I've mentioned, but we are doing different things in finance, sustainability, agriculture, and a growing number of other areas. The Topl blockchain can support projects across borders and different industries, and our blockchain users are fully experiencing digital and sustainable transformation. So through that, today we are actually going to be talking to one of our longest partners. But before I introduce him, what I would love to do every week or every time, this is going to be monthly, every third Wednesday, we will have this live discussion with different partners or potential partners in our ecosystem. But I want to share with you, as some of you know, I'm on the CNBC's ESG Council, and I want to share some ESG news that has come up the last few weeks that I would like for all of us to know about. So before we get started, here are some of the top stories for the week. From the community, we've seen a lot of different goals towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals that were laid out by the UN. So some of the community, let me just start with energy giant Chevron, has announced earlier this week that they plan to significantly ramp up their investments in low carbon businesses to over 10 billion by 2028, more than 3x actually the prior guidance they had, which was 3 billion. Investments will actually target key areas, including carbon capture and offsets. We'll talk a little bit about that today. Renewable fuels, greenhouse gases reduction projects, and various other things. Jewelry manufacturer Pandora announced this week that they've launched an extensive decarbonization plan across its operations and its whole value chain, with commitments to cut greenhouse gases in half by 2030 and to reach net zero by 2040. This is very exciting, especially in that industry. And then one of my favorite activists, investors, Engine Number One, that actually forced that board shakeup at ExxonMobil, have moved to accelerate a lot of clean energy in different industries, but they have actually unveiled a new strategy for using environmental, social, and governance data, or ESG data, in investments. In this very long report that they wrote, it's not that long, it's actually 38 pages long report, they released it on Monday. The money manager said that it would integrate ESG data with conventional financial analysis to scrutinize companies and pick investments. So the total value framework is what they're seeking to bring forth, is predict how performance is actually mapped to your ESG concern effectively for a company's full value profile. So super exciting about that. Now, before we get to our guests, some quick and Topl updates. The first one being, I always talk about this show is called Purpose, Planet, Profit with Topl, but some of the purpose is Topl is in that phase of our life. We are just about to start a new fundraise. At the same time, we, as from a product perspective, we are going to talk a little bit about Topl's blockchain as a service product today, and we actually had that product launch earlier this year as beta, and from there, the actual transition has now fully happened to there is no longer a beta tag on our BaaS tool. So it's available for anyone to use, and you can access it through our website pretty quickly. So that's it from Topl's side. And today I'm super excited to introduce you to Larry. He is the CEO of Media Sourcery, and I am excited to have him here with us. And he is one of our longest and earliest partners at Topl. Larry, welcome to the show with Topl.
Thanks for having me, Ken. I'm glad you said longest and not oldest. I was waiting for Chris to start with the old age jokes, but congratulations on your show. I like the name, Purpose, Planet, and Profit. That's very applicable for what you guys are doing.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Larry. So yeah, Larry, go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, I'm the CEO of a company called Media Sourcery. We are a workflow automation and security solutions company. We, among other products, have a rules engine, a workflow engine, an authorization services engine, and we use all of those products on what we used to call our cold chain solution on top of the Topl blockchain, but we're going to have to change it because it does more than just cold chain products now.
Yes, so and I actually want us to double click into that, but before we go there is just from both of our perspective is I'm trying to remember, like, how did the two of us connect? I know I put this question down for us to discuss, but I think it was 2018, right? Like we met each other a while back at a Capital Factory event in Austin.
That's correct. It was a panel. I don't remember the topic of the panel. There were a lot of random blockchain panels in 2018 at that point in time. But I'm actually in the podcast room at Capital Factory. Shout out to Kevin for getting me all set up here, by the way. But I think it was interesting because our background is in security and non-repudiation. We actually have a patent on non-repudiation, and a lot of those same constructs apply to the blockchain technology. So we've been involved in a lot of those panels and discussions. So it was great to meet you. And I think James Amon, your CTO, was there as well. Either James or Chris was there. So we met 2/3 of the three founders in one fell swoop.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It was definitely, 2018 was an interesting time for blockchain, and it's still interesting, but definitely was an interesting time. So maybe, yes, let's go a little bit deeper into the cold chain, comment you made is kind of how do the two solutions complement each other? I'd love to hear from your perspective, given where we met and then kind of where we are now. Let's talk a little bit about the cold chain example for the COVID-19 test kits, and then a little bit further on how the technologies interact as well as what it is that we are.
So we have a very good partner named Achieve Health Management, which is a multifaceted healthcare company, and we do a lot of things for them and with them. But we started helping them with their workflow for COVID-19 test kits. They have a partner in Korea that makes an FDA-approved COVID-19 test kit, and they needed a way to track it. You and I had been talking, James and I had been talking, and instead of just building a workflow that didn't make use of distributed ledger technology, we decided we'd put it on your blockchain. And when I say put it on your blockchain, what we were trying to do was prove and provide transparency that a kit moved from point A to point B. So when we started, we were just doing basic supply chain stuff, right? This is an asset, this is an event in the life of the asset. But I was at one of the labs, and there was an issue with the test kits not being as effective as they were supposed to be, as they were tested to be. And it was traced back to the fact that the kits were not being kept in the cooler. I mean, this was early times in the pandemic. People weren't sure what they were doing. But if you don't keep these test kits in the cooler, if you keep them above negative 20 degrees Celsius for longer than 60 minutes, the efficacy goes down and you really shouldn't use them anymore. So we decided that there were several reasons why a kit might not be kept at the right temperature, and we need to track that. So we started taking our workflow product, putting it on top of your blockchain product. We brought in a partner named Varcode that has a set of temperature sensitive barcodes, slapped them on the side of all of those test kits and started tracking them. So the good news for the world is the usage went down for a while, but now it's just back badly, but it's going crazy again. We have a system another workflow system that registers tests. So Achieve Health provides testing solutions for schools in, I don't even know if I can name all the states, California, Arizona, Illinois, about to be Texas, and a few others. And then we track the kits. We're actually right now trying to reconcile all of that data as to how many tests were done at what school with how many supplies with what kits, so we can merge those two supply chains together.
And so kind of like expanding from there, because yes, it was like this was a specific problem that we were solving, but then at the same time, this tool that came about out of this cold chain tool can do a lot more now, right? Like, what are some of the other things you're starting to see?
So we started monitoring not only the temperature of the asset at rest, which is what those, if you have a temperature sensitive Varcode and you put it on the side, it will only tell you the temperature when you scan it. And we wanted to know if there was a problem beforehand. So we started out with some pretty traditional temperature sensitive devices that you put inside a cooler. But they were through traditional networks like AT&T and Verizon, and the price point was just not proper for these assets. And it wasn't cost effective. I mean, one of the things that we like about our partnership with your blockchain is in order to move assets across the supply chain, if you're going to add in a technology layer, there needs to be a predictable price per asset. So I can go back to the vendor or the originator and say, this is how much extra this is going to cost on top of the blockchain. I didn't have that for those temperature sensors. So we also partnered with another blockchain company that you and I are very familiar with and like, called Helium. Mm-hmm. Helium provides a protocol called LoRaWAN for sensors. So we now have sensors that can sit in the coolers that look for the LoRaWAN network and will let us know if I have this asset and it was scanned and it's inside this cooler and I can tie that cooler to this sensor, then I can say that it was stored properly at, whatever path or whatever point along the path that it was.
And I think we have a question here. In the workflow system for the test kit temperature tracking, what I'm hearing here that there is no sort of manual entry into our blockchain. Everything is automated and sensor driven from your side.
It's almost all automatic. So you have to scan the barcode just like any other asset in a supply chain. So one of the things that we've added in that we learned, and frankly I should have known from all of the inventory systems that we've done, is when you're shipping out 50 assets, you don't want to scan the assets with a mobile app. So you scan one. I mean, there's guns for that, right? We've had handheld barcode scanners. So for the warehouse or for some of the larger labs, we've added in a hand scanner where you can just say these are from this lot number. Here's the expiration date, and just shoot all 50 of them, put them in, and go. So they're just like any other system. There is some manual entry because you have to scan the barcode, but the sensor data is automatic. I mean, one of the things that we do, which I think is different and is a feature and a problem at the same time, is we take all of the data about an event. So if you decided you needed an image or a document or a sensor piece of data or whatever, we say, okay, for this event, and that event can be a temperature scan or a receipt or a shipment or whatever in the life of that asset, we put all of that stuff in readable text on your blockchain. So that if somebody doesn't trust that we actually did that, they can drill all the way down and they don't have to look at a hash and they don't have to decode it. It's all right there.
Yeah, we've definitely one of the things that I think, as Topl we really aspire to do too is really make sure that it's the blockchain is accessible as possible through APIs, but at the same time that information is presentable as possible, and you have access to actually be able to display that to your end user or viewer, essentially.
Yeah, and it's going to be big for not only the COVID test kit system, but for other assets. Like for the COVID test kit system, if a shipment is delayed, right? So these kits are shipped in dry ice. If it's delayed or it sits on the dock or something else happens to it, and it gets received later, that could damage those kits. And we want the person on the receiving end who notices that that's a problem to be able to get that information and say, look, carrier, this is a problem. Here's all my evidence. And the evidence is, I've got as much data about that problem as possible. And they can hopefully go rectify the situation.
Yeah, and actually, Benjamin, thank you for making this comment about this could be a good application for pharma industry. So interestingly, Media Sourcery has actually had some foray into the medical cannabis space recently. And so I would love for Larry to actually expand on some of that too, because yes, there's definitely a lot of applications, not just in traditional pharma, but also the medical cannabis space. So Larry, could you tell us a little bit more about that too?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's a really, really fascinating medical cannabis company in Oklahoma, introduced by my best friend, Versi. Shout out to Versi. Hey, Verse. Gentleman's name is Nathan Richter. He's a veteran, and we've got so many different things going on with Nathan. I'm not even sure where to start. So there's an obvious need to track medical cannabis. There's a lot of fraud. There are reporting requirements. There are some tax requirements now. State of New York is starting to tax on the percentage of THC. And if you're someone like Nathan, there are requirements to try to see to track which product got to which person and if that product was effective for that person or not. Nathan has created a PTSD supplement, working with a bunch of PhDs and MDs that are much smarter than I am about this stuff. But it's called Battle Buddy, and because Nathan is a veteran, he's really interested on changing the mix of that solution if needed, if it doesn't do what he and the patient or customer want it to do. So there's a lot to unwrap on medical cannabis. There's just the regular asset tracking like we do with any supply chain. You paid certain amount of money, did what you pay for, get there, and where does it go? There's proof that it is actually the product that you want it to be. So there's the fraud in the recreational cannabis industry, from what I'm told, is huge, but it's also there in the medical cannabis industry. So you want to make sure that those assets that are certified by Nathan's company, Nature's Key, and the state are what got there. But we also want to say, if somebody got one that's not, we can track it back and provide that information to whoever needs it.
And how would you say, just from we're all learning together, but from your words, how does blockchain technology really help with a lot of that process? And because I think one of the biggest things is people needing to understand the stack, right? The tech stack that happens here. It's the blockchain being this proof infrastructure, and then your technology being the enabler of a lot of this activity that needs to be fed to that proof infrastructure and then be displayed again. So how would you kind of just, from simple terms, help people understand the supply chain industry, how that connects?
Well, if we, that's a really good question. And I think the best way to think about it is we could, and we have with our workflow apps, taken all the information about a supply chain and put it in a database somewhere that's only accessible by the company whose workflow it is. And there are some cases where that's important. You know, if I'm a healthcare company and I'm just doing an internal patient setup, there's no need to share that data. But for these, and most supply chains, there's multiple participants in the supply chain. Multiple things can go right and multiple things can go wrong. And all that data ought to be available and shared. So the whole idea behind distributed ledger technology is that it's shared distributed ledger technology. So it's not just on a server that Media Sourcery has, or it's not just on a server that Nature's Key has. It can be a server that a lot of people have, so that you can actually trust what's out there. I mean, if you have the happy path and a COVID kit or a Nature's Key medical cannabis sample or whatever goes from where it started to where it's ended, then you really never have to go look at that. But if there are issues, or if there are reports that need to be done, or if there are certifications that you want to get, or if you want proof that you actually did what you said you could do, putting that in plain English, like we talked about earlier, on a distributed ledger is a huge advantage.
Yeah, and I think like we had the question of how do you minimize the entry of bad data onto a blockchain in these use cases you have worked on. I mean, there are different ways that you guys have actually enabled that, but I do think it's different. It's different for every case, right?
It's different for every case. I mean, I mentioned in the beginning, we have an authorization service. So we do make sure that only people who are authorized to put in data for particular targets or particular entities are the ones that can enter in the data. We do and have contemplated anonymous logins for something like medical cannabis. If there are people who don't want their information out there, but they do want to participate in fraud detection or feedback to Nature's Key, for example, we do have that capability. Can people enter bad data? Yeah, there's always ways for them to enter bad data, but we make sure that only people who are authorized can enter data, and the people who are end users and anonymous users, they're really only looking at what got shipped to them. So there's always possibilities, because we want to take the data that comes in and put it on the blockchain for everybody to see. But it would be difficult for a lot of bad data to get put in.
Yeah, and I always tell people it's like one of the biggest things that blockchains do. They don't necessarily eliminate any, fraud or like aspects of it, but it actually isolates it, so you do know where that entry came from, and you could actually point to it. Because Benjamin was asking about like audit mechanisms, in place through each data point and tracking it, and would be interesting to automate it. And one of the biggest things about like having this like proof infrastructure that captures kind of as a net underneath this like data infrastructure, it allows you to then go and essentially do that audit, where it's like, here's the data file, here's the proof infrastructure point, like, do they match? If I rehash this, if I actually go and zip that up and look at that hash again, does it match the original entry? So you can actually do that audit. So yeah, Benjamin, it's possible, and it actually is something that a lot of people are using blockchains to become like reasonable assurance measures, where you can have some of that evidence underlying the actual starting, or what do you call it, the evidence is underlined by this proof infrastructure, and therefore you have a checkpoint of what's actually going on.
And that's well said. I mean, if you think about, so we could have, and we actually have now, data that gets entered from multiple blockchains, multiple sensors, multiple people in multiple scans, right? And we take all of that, we call it evidence, right? So it's the evidence that some user on our product thinks is important evidence to prove an event. And whether it comes from a helium sensor, a tracking sensor, or whether it comes from a document I put up on Arweave, maybe this is a lab document from Nature's Key, maybe this is an inspection document from our recycling partners, we then take all of that and say, this event for this asset has this proof, and it's all in a transaction on the Topl blockchain. So that there is this audit trail, right? I mean, you can go look at that transaction, find those links to those other blockchains, go back to their blockchains, see where all that was. So in a sense, the audit trail is in the transactions that link to all the other transactions.
Yeah, no, I think that's like there was another question that popped up here, but I think that's exactly the other piece of it is auditable. Blockchains help with that functionality. I think this other question might be very relevant. Larry, if we want to talk about this, the other project we've been dying to tell people about is this like turbine recycling project. It's like, Versy's asking us how long does it take for someone to implement, your solutions in other industries. And so I think that's definitely a good question, is like this new project or this, new group you're working with, like what's been the process and how long has it taken, and what kind of do you see as a time to implementation window for these type of things?
My buddy Versy's always trying to get me to work harder and work longer hours. That's why he asked that question. So if I worked 100 hours, no, I'm just kidding. So let me give a little bit of background, because I think Kim, like you said, that is a really good example. We have a partner out of Houston called Everpoint Services that does inspections and recyclings on wind turbines, solar arrays, and batteries, and they provide other services as well. And we partnered with them to build with them a set of technology solutions around those three entities. And one of those is around wind turbine recycling. And to directly answer Versy's question, we stood up a pilot using the existing, call it X-Chain, because we got to come up with a new name for it, solution in less than a month. And we're still modifying it because we're still learning what we want to do with wind turbine recycling. So the solution today, the companies are doing the best they can, but they basically build a Word document that says, I recycle, and here's what I did. So there's no proof, right? So all of the things we talked about with Nature's Keys Cannabis solution and the COVID-19 are perfect for this. So we're going to do a pilot probably in Sweetwater, Texas. We were supposed to do it this week, but circumstances prevented us. Probably good, because you guys had this small hurricane in Houston, so probably a good thing we didn't go there.
Yes, it was definitely a small hurricane.
Yeah, relatively speaking. But we're going to create an asset, which is that wind turbine, and we're going to create events where we start demolition of that wind turbine, and we prove that with pictures and GPS. We're at the wind farm location. Photos that we did it, any kind of markings that are on the wind turbine. Then we're going to add in a demolition end. And when you demolish a wind turbine, if you've seen them, they're on these big trucks going down the highway a lot. You have to cut them into pieces so that they can be transported either on a truck or in some kind of a roll-up recycling dumpster. So you'll put them on transport and you'll take them somewhere. And those somewheres are being determined by Everpoint, right? So the process of recycling that they're putting together is a very creative endeavor. They're trying to build a circular economy that says, if I'm going to recycle this wind turbine, I really don't want to use, I don't want to expend more energy recycling it than it would take to make it or bury it, right? I want to make some kind of a profit by doing this in a purpose-driven way. So they may take it to a grinder. They may take it to, there's a variety of different places that they may take it. And so we've got industrial trackers that go on the lower end network that we're going to track this data all the way through. We've talked to some companies that have a polymer that we could potentially spray on to the recycled materials and then track it that way all the way through. That kind of violates the keep it simple and keep it cheap solution, because then you're going to have to check them somewhere along the way, but it's certainly a possibility. But then just like the COVID kits, we'll have this track that says, we did these events for this asset. The asset's a wind turbine. We've got all of this data about what we did. So the data might be a picture of the wind turbine. It might be the certification of the guy who cut it. It might be a safety record of what we did. And then in the end, if we need to provide proof of that recycling, we can suck out all of those events for that asset and that proof, and provide that as proof of recycling.
And I think one of the things that, kind of like across all three of these different applications we talked about, like just sharing a little bit about, ease of integration, like it's the same Topl blockchain, it's the same integration mechanism. That's probably, I can absolutely talk about our product, but I think that would be useful to people too, is to understand like integrating into a blockchain, it's not different for every single project. It just depends on what the data sources are and how they're being captured by your technology.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we abstracted the concept, working with James, your CTO, and Christopher, my CTO. We put together an abstract of assets, events, corporate entities, target locations, and then we've allowed the customization of what those asset types could be or what those event types could be. Some of them are always the same. Everybody ships and receives, assets get created, but you don't do a demolishment start and a demolishment begin on some blockchains, or on some processes like you would do with the wind turbine. So we've abstracted that layer. We're really using the blockchain as, like you and I talked about at the beginning of this podcast, it is the ledger. So it's where we're putting all of the tracks and putting everything that we want to get. So one of the features that we have in our system is if you see an event, there's a blockchain transaction ID that points to the now out of beta, now live blockchain as a service, right? And you can click on that and you can go to that transaction and you'll see in English everything about that transaction. So you won't see a gobbledygook hash, you'll see what we really put on that blockchain. And in our next version, you'll be able to, if there's a link in there to a document that's on Arweave or IPFS or wherever we put it, you can click on that link and go to that document. Or if there's sensor data from a helium sensor, you'll be able to click on a link and go see, what we think we're going to do is let them go see all of the sensor data, not just the sensor data that's on that transaction. Because sensor data for something at rest is going to be a continuous. Like if I've got a sensor in a cold chain storage unit, I'm going to get readings every 15 minutes.
Correct.
I've got a sensor that's tracking a shipment. Like we're looking at these small sensors that you can put in boxes and track them as you ship. You may not want to see all of it. You may just want to see when it left, where it left from, where it got to, but we'll make all that data available so that it is as transparent as possible. And that will make people trust the system.
And so to dive a little bit deeper into, yes, we're talking about proof of provenance, not just for temperature or recycling, or in medical cannabis cases, it's very much the provenance and making sure that people are making legitimate claims about what's going on. But to go even deeper on it, if we take the recycling example as an example, like carbon credits, right? Like, so this, like the fact that, this group, how would you, like, if you're gauging like what's going on with the carbon footprint and what they're able to prove, and how can we actually think about that from a carbon credits perspective? And I'm happy to also dive, because this is a world I've been very deeply pulled into recently. But I think it would be a good discussion to think about like connecting the dots from like proof of recycling to like actually being able to be rewarded for the carbon footprint reduction that is being created.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, we maybe Sarah won't cut us off and we can talk for another 2 or 3 hours on this. Well, okay, there's probably no chance in that. I don't know that there is a standard for what the carbon credits for wind turbine recycling is. I think that's still going to be developed, and I think a lot of people are going to weigh in. But what I do know is by taking all of the data that we're collecting and keeping all of that data and putting it out there, we have the ability to say in a transparent way, hey, we calculated a carbon credit. We don't know if it's right. What we use to calculate that carbon credit is all of these data points for this transaction that we did. And if it changes, if there's some consortium in the future that says, here's the standard, if you can show me this data point and this data point and this data point, I'll give you a carbon credit, then we can go back and recalculate.
Correct. Yes.
So, I mean, the good thing is it allows a company like Everpoint Services, who is on the leading edge, I think, of trying to figure this out, to experiment and they won't be penalized for experimentation. So they can go try a variety of different things. And as long as we track, and we may not know what we need to track. So one of the things we're doing for a lot of these processes is we're over tracking. We're putting more sensors out there than we probably need, but we'll have the data, and we'll have the data for a long, long time. And they can come back and say, well, okay, we calculated this wrong for that first demolition we did in Sweetwater, Texas, but we've got all the data. So now we're going to go back and recalculate it and show you what it should be.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest, and also talking about like a bunch of different data being captured, is like having stable fees on a blockchain and having affordable fees on a blockchain become very important. But at the same time, about this capturing piece, like one thing we've been focused in like intently is like, okay, so how do you go from tracking impact to tokenizing that impact to transacting that impact? So essentially with a carbon credit, how do you capture that carbon credit's provenance, so proof of the origin, so the repository, how do you create the repository of those carbon credits, and then essentially tokenize them, so create the registry. So from that repo it goes into registry, and then how do you connect that registry to carbon markets? So one thing we've been working on at Topl is, as being this proof infrastructure, it's not just about being, the tracking capabilities, but it's also becoming this like economy where you can track and then transact. So one of the partnerships we're working on is with different carbon markets, and actually one of the largest voluntary carbon markets is who we are closely befriended with. And one of the things we're doing is creating this environment where you can create these, we call them creative carbon credits. So it is these, like you said, like some of them don't have standards necessarily, but people want to self-certify that process and then create this repository. And then we're working very closely with this voluntary carbon market to really differentiate like the commodity genome of that specific credit, so that you can actually create an environment where once that repository is created, once that registry is available, you could potentially start selling those carbon credits within these voluntary carbon markets. And so it's, for the first time now, you're able to, not need to go to like a massive registry, carbon registry, to be able to get that validation. You could actually do the process yourself, or even a certifier could use the technology to have this as a registry as a service where they can capture and then transact. And so one of the biggest things I'm focused in on is to open up those new capabilities for people like you and others that are using the blockchain to be able to say like, okay, not only are we, capturing these impact credits or these carbon credits, but we want to be able to transact them into these marketplaces. Yep. And so I think for something like this is a good example of that exact thing of like, there's not necessarily those standards yet, but if we can capture all the evidence, and because it's immutable and we have those histories that are in existence, we can start creating these like creative carbon credit repositories, which ultimately the goal is to monetize that impact, right? So yep. These companies that are doing good can start actually being rewarded for what they're doing. So I think that's another piece of, what we're really focused in on, to bring more functionality into that proof infrastructure, to not only have this like, checkpointing, like the breadcrumbs that Benjamin was talking, this process breadcrumbs that are being captured. But at the same time is, how do you take that and now go to the next step of really bringing this forward, and like, how can you be rewarded for doing good? So I think that's a very important piece of the pie too.
I think, as long as we have that transparency, right, we can go back and do whatever we want with that data. You and I had talked once. I think we had a query, and we may go back to these people again to track the provenance of very, very large trees. One of our partner customers moves some of the biggest trees in the world. They moved the trees for the 9/11 memorial, the trees around the Apple headquarters. Just some really amazing engineering, and they wanted to, when people request a particular tree, they want to make sure it's that same tree. So there's that asset. But we started looking at, there are lots of sensors in the world now that you can attach to trees. I actually know what a dendrometer is. I can almost pronounce it, and I can probably spell it, but you attach it to the tree, and it gives you all amount of data about the amount of moisture that's in the tree, how big around the trunk is, or how big around a branch is. And there's equations that you can use to calculate how much carbon that tree is going to sequester. So if I took that tree and I planted it at a corporate location,
Correct.
and I could put a dendrometer on it for some period of time, you could keep that data, in our solution on your blockchain, and say, okay, I looked at this guy's white paper, and it says if I do multiply the size of the canopy by the height of the tree and the age of the tree and the moisture in the tree, then I should have this much carbon sequestration, and that equals a carbon credit. And somebody could come back later and say, well, that guy's paper was wrong. We go, okay, we've got all the data we used to calculate it. We didn't just say, give me 5 carbon credits. We said, give us 5 carbon credits because of these backup metadata.
And I think that's the biggest thing that I'm seeing in all the carbon conversations I'm having, or carbon sequestration conversations, is proof of stake, like proof of the actual, not double spending. If there's one space that talks about double spending as much as the blockchain space does, because that is very much what blockchains came to solve, is a double spending problem, it's the carbon space. It's about not being able to go sell that carbon credit to multiple parties.
Right.
So it is also about that immutable evidence. So even if you have those 5 carbon credits, you can only sell them once, because the repository only shows 5. And once they're actually sold, they're sold. So they get burned, essentially.
Yep.
So that's another part of this. But I agree, it is about the new way of trying to capture carbon means we need proof of provenance, proof of origin of where those credits are coming from, and have that evidence mapping. Not just saying we have a big forest in the middle of nowhere, Africa, or, it's some of the tropical regions, and we've fenced it, and therefore now we have multiple parties.
Give me $5 and I'll plant a tree there for you. But
correct.
Yeah, you'll never be able to prove it because it's not on the blockchain.
Correct. And so I think those are very interesting pieces of the pie. But I truly do believe, like I tell everyone, you have to start tracking before you can transacting. When I was working as a quant a few years ago, literally when they asked me to build them this multi-asset ESG portfolio, I realized that we're never truly going to transact on ESG practices until we're not truly able to track ESG practices and how they're happening throughout the value chain. But yeah, Larry, this was great. I know we are up against our time and we are live, so they're going to cut us off here.
Wow.
But anything else in the last, minute and a half we have left here that I think we touched on everything we wanted to touch on, but I feel they're how do people get a hold of you? How can we make sure that, obviously everyone can reach out to Topl, but at the same time, we'll probably refer you to MSI if there is a project like this. And that's kind of how we work, is this referral to MSI. But Larry, talk a little bit about how people can get a hold of you.
Well, you can find us on your partner pages. You can find us at mediasourcery.com, and they can find you on our partner pages. So, but yeah, I appreciate you having me on as the guest. I'm looking forward to watching more of the people that you have on here, and looking forward to seeing what's next.
Awesome. Well, thank you for everyone who has been watching. Thank you so much for being here. And yes, we're super excited to see what we can do together going forward. We have a bunch of projects, actually one that contacted me yesterday that I need to get in touch with you on as well. So yes, there's still a lot of new stuff that is to come for us together. So super exciting. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Larry, for being here.
Thanks for having me.